Jesse Jason with Lisa Blanchard as the host of Airing Addiction.
I share often my journey started on this campus. Got sober as a client here, just like you.
I really do see phenomenal change.
Always hope. I've seen situations that on the surface look impossible become possible.
Doing this podcast is to share those recovery stories, be honest about what the challenges are and have some real conversations, but kind of share that out on the airwaves.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to June Airing Addiction. So glad everybody's here, whether you're going to watch this today, watching it live, picking up some part in June. It is Pride Month, so happy Pride Month to everybody. And we have a very special guest on today to help us celebrate Pride Month and share experience, strength, and hope. So I will kick it over to Lisa to introduce. Who do we have today, Lisa?
Thanks so much, Jesse. I'm really excited about today's conversation. This is always probably one of my favorite episodes of the year. Whenever we have the opportunity to celebrate recovery and pride at the same time, it's always my favorite hour of the month and my favorite hour of the year. So we have Danny on today. So Danny's a person in recovery, originally from Oklahoma. We were just chatting about that before we got started and relocated to Massachusetts 3 years ago. Danny's recovery journey began in August of 2000, but his first experience with treatment started with an eating disorder at 15 years old. So maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that today as well. And he's continuing his recovery journey right here in central Massachusetts, where he and his husband reside of 20 years, which is fantastic. Congratulations. 20 years is a big accomplishment. And really, I'd love to hear more about how you practice your recovery principles and even about some of your work, right? Working in AI, which is a really cool new area for us to talk about. It actually does touch behavioral health too. So with that, I'd love to just have you share as much of your story as you're comfortable with, Danny, and help us get to know you a little bit.
Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Jesse. It is a pleasure to be here. This is my first ever podcast, so it's exciting to try something new and be able to share a little bit of my experience, strength, and hope. And I've been giving a lot. I've been given a lot by recovery, so anything I can do to give back is something that I want to be able to do. And really, this helps me a lot too. Anytime I share my story, I always get to reflect on how far I've come and how much I've been given. And it's gratitude for me is one of the things that keep me doing what I do. So that's it. My recovery journey didn't begin until August of 2000. And I actually didn't start using until I was 19. And by that, I mean any sort of chemicals, drinking or any type of sort of drugs. And that's because I grew up in a family of addicts. My mother and father were both addicts. My grandmother raised me, and I always told myself that I would never do what my mother and father would do. And from a very early age, I adopted a very strict set of rules that I lived my life by. I was one of those people who really dug into school, big nerd, and that's because I had a set of rules that if I followed those rules, I was a good person. If I didn't, I knew that I was a bad person. And that really was the basis of my life up until high school. And I'm going to blend together a little bit of my addiction story with my coming out, since it's the Pride Month special. And that's and I was in the closet until college as well. So one of the rules that I followed, I was raised in a very strict church, and that gave me a set of rules that I could live my life by, that if I followed those rules, I was good. And I knew that saved me from being bad. And I was very rigid in that as well. And did that all the way through high school. And I'll go back a little bit to the eating disorder unit as I touch on that a little bit later, but that's the first time that I could really see that addiction, this disease that I have, that I consider that I have, really touched my life much earlier. That obsession with doing something to make me good, being able to identify with something outside of me, that if I did that, it would make me good. And food is one of those places where I found that escape. But I didn't really know that at the time. I was still doing everything that I should to make myself good. And all through high school, I always felt like an alien. I didn't belong where I was. I didn't fit with, even though I was in the band, I didn't really fit in the band. Even though I was a nerd, I didn't really fit with the nerds. I wanted to hang out with the cool kids, but didn't fit there. So that was my high school journey, and got into college and was in the band in college as well. I went to the University of Tulsa, and we were in I was in the marching band, and I still felt like an alien all the time. And we were going to the Freedom Bowl in San Diego at the time, and I'd planned before we went down there that this was going to be the weekend that I drank for the first time. And it's because everybody was always looking like they had a good time, and I didn't fit in. And I felt like if I did this, I would fit in. And we went down there and got into the hotel that night, and I started drinking. And it was almost instantaneous that I felt like I fit in for the first time in my whole entire life. I felt like people were laughing with me. They weren't laughing at me. I was part of the in crowd, and I felt like I had found the magic key that I had always missed. And like the addict that I am, at the end of the night, I had thrown up on myself. I don't remember the whole night, but still, even though there's that negative part of it, I didn't look at any of that. I just looked at that I felt like I was fitting in. And having that type of night, and next morning, marching in Disneyland or Disney World, whatever one is in California, having a massive headache right in front of the trumpets. I played the mellophone at the time, so not an ideal way to have your first using experience like that. It was wild, but it didn't matter to me, because the next night I did the same thing, and that was my key to fitting in from that point forward. And my mother at the time, I was talking to my mother at the time, and she said, "Dan, you need to worry." She was in recovery. She was at one of her recovery attempts at the time. "You need to worry. Genetics and play into this." And I was like, "Mom, I'm not doing anything that you were doing. I'm not abandoning my kids. I'm not losing jobs or anything like that. I'm only doing this on the weekends." And I thought that I was okay. And from that point, I was 19 at the time, and I was in my first treatment center for drugs and alcohol within a couple of years. So very, very quickly, it progressed to that place where it had controlled me. I think maybe 6 months I was doing it recreationally, and I was on my way home one night, and the first time that I used in order to change the way I felt, I knew that I was angry at someone, and I made a decision to pull into some convenience store and buy a 12-pack because I wanted to feel different. That's the first time that I remember wanting to change directly the way I feel by using something. And I still prided myself on the fact that I was just using legal drugs at the time, and it wasn't long after that I decided to start venturing out to things that were illegal at the time. And like I said, very quickly it went from recreational use to it controlled my life. By the end of my freshman year, I had decided to let go of my scholarship, let go of my education, because I needed money to party. And very quickly after that, all the goals and all the dreams that I held for myself went away. I came out right about that same time. And I also felt like I'd finally started finding who I was, that I was comfortable enough with myself that I no longer had to hide behind these rules that I had built for myself, that I could start being true to myself. And I didn't realize that I was still so scared about that, and I still had so much inner hate and inner disgust at myself that I was still masking it with some of these chemicals. I didn't know how to truly appreciate myself at this point, that I was still punishing myself for something that I felt like I was doing wrong. I still hadn't truly came to that level of acceptance that this is who I am, and that there is a power greater than myself that cares for me. And that's one of the things about my coming out story that did help me with my recovery journey after I finally did get into recovery, is that leaving the church that I grew up in and being I remember in my dorm room one night, I was sitting there and I had this poster on my wall. It's called L'Enfant, and it had this man holding a baby. And the guy was good looking. And I was looking at that and I was like, if a parent loves their child so much, and I imagine myself having a child, that there's nothing that they could do that I would not love them. If my God loved me infinitely more than that, how can me being gay make him hate me? And there was a magic switch that switched at that moment that made it okay for me to come out to myself. And that step right there, I think, is what helped me in my recovery journey whenever I started looking at a power greater than myself caring for me. I'm one of those people in my recovery journey that I have multiple powers greater than myself. Sometimes I don't have a real good relationship with the God of my understanding. And sometimes I think he's an old guy up there that's too slow and he needs a new job. And on those days, I use science, or I use the spiritual principles of the 12 steps. And when I'm a little bit more spiritually fit, I start talking to that spiritual presence in my life. So that switch that I had in college when I came out to myself is one of those keys that helped me for really adopting a power greater than myself later on in life, that helped me to form a relationship that I use in my daily life in recovery. Because in August of 2000, I didn't have that. I thought that I was the worst of the worst. I was living with my grandmother. I hadn't had a job. I was unemployable. Every night I was getting loaded to the point of unconsciousness. I was lying in my own filth. I was unemployable, unpalatable to public. And I knew that I had to do something different. And I finally, for me, surrendered to the fact that I couldn't use anymore. And I started getting in recovery and knew that I had to start trusting, and not just trusting other people, but trusting a program. Because through treatment, stuff like that, I saw people who had been in recovery for a long time and their lives continued to get better. And I was finally willing to do what it took for that. And I started getting in 12 steps. I'm a big believer in set where you fit. I found a NA meeting in Oklahoma that was really, really good for me. And surprisingly, this was in a bunch of straight bikers. I mean, I felt like an alien at the time, but within the first night, those straight bikers had adopted me as kind of like their little, it's not really even like the little token gay, which I felt like the little token gay, but they loved me and they had a great time with me. They weren't afraid with me. They didn't treat me as separate than, even though at times I still felt separate than. But I made recovery the basis of my life. I went to my home group every week. I didn't go to 90 meetings in 90 days, even though it was suggested I came close, but all the things that I'd resisted doing before, I became willing to do. And I went through the steps and I steadily started seeing my life improve. I got a job as a receptionist for the University of Oklahoma. I started working the steps. I bought tires for my car. I bought a license tag. So I actually had a legal car for the first time, and I don't know how, and forever. And my life started steadily improving. And my sponsor and my friends at the time believed in me. And I continued making these improvements in my life. I knew the thing that I adopted at the time is if I just do the next right thing, that's all I have to worry about. So I started doing the next right thing. I went back to school and I started applying on myself there. I got my associate's degree. I thought I got an associate's, I can get a bachelor's. I got a bachelor's, I can get a master's. And I finished a PhD. And for someone who couldn't get out of my grandmother's bed because I was so loaded and barely got a job as a receptionist, to finish my education that way still amazes me. Do these people realize that I'm an addict that was just barely able to function a few short years ago? And to be able to get a job up here in New England and be able to live that life that I've always wanted to live. Because when I moved up here, I've had two small relapses since August of 2000. And each time it was because I started allowing myself to feel like I was a normal person. I heard this analogy in a speaker tape a while ago. Is like, for me, and I've adopted this to my life. For me, my recovery is kind of like a refrigerator, that you can unplug a refrigerator and the stuff inside stays good for a little while, but eventually that stuff is going to start to rot. And for me, unless I'm plugged into a recovery journey for me, I start to rot from the inside out. And I had the first relapse that I'd had, I started having headaches and had to go to the doctor, and they thought, and it wasn't, it was just a little, they call it a meningioma, but they thought they had found cancer in my brain. And I freaked out. I hadn't been going to my meetings as regularly as I used to. And I ended up, they gave me a prescription medication for opiates, and I was off and running for a while. And thankfully, I had a good chunk of years behind me that I knew that there was freedom from that. So I wished I would have stayed clean from that very beginning, but I'm grateful for my relapses as well. This last relapse, what it allowed me to do was to look back at my life. And it was after I went to an estate sale. Me and my husband like to go to estate sales. And for some reason, I have to go into how we met at some point, which is kind of funny. But I went to an estate sale and found a prescription pill bottle. And after I had left the estate sale, I was still shaking and I was mad. And I called my sponsor and I was like, I'm working my steps hard enough. I'm doing service work. I'm sponsoring people. I am a sponsor. I'm working with my sponsor. I should be working hard enough that I don't act like this. And she said, Danny, you're just an addict. It doesn't matter. You can't work a step right enough. You can't do enough work that you're not going to be an addict. And it clicked for me at that moment that I'm never going to transcend past this place where I'm at. I can get a little bit more comfortable in my own skin, and I'm going to, but for me, I know today I'm just an addict, and that I'm grateful for my recovery, because I have a life today that I never thought I would live, living in New England, having a home, having a husband that I've been married to for 20 years, and he hasn't killed me yet. Having the 3 dogs that supervise me by my desk all day, every day, and having friends. The friends that I've made up here in recovery in New England have been amazing. And I'm still have a very strong relationship with my sponsor that I had in Oklahoma. So friends for decades as well. And I know that I went for a little bit over 15 minutes, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what my recovery has been like. I'm an open book. So Lisa, Jesse, I'm looking forward to this discussion and talking a little bit more about my experience and what I can share.
And unlike how you started your story, there are no rules to this podcast. So, it's totally fine to go over 15 minutes. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to reflect a bit on, is the rigidity in rules that really kind of kept you stuck. And then when you started to open up to some flexibility, and you described it really well, even in your current recovery, that flexibility you take to the power greater than yourself, right? Some days it's, a full-on spiritual being that you're speaking to, and some days it's science, because that's all you feel like grabbing onto. And it gives you kind of that set of way of being with flexibility, instead of these rigid rules of, if I do this, I'm good. If I follow this path, I'm fine. Otherwise, I'm not. And I really, particularly in Pride Month, I think it's a really great opportunity to talk about that flexibility, and that even in a 12-step community, there is lots of structure, right? You guys can describe it way better than I can, Jesse and Danny, but I've been doing this for a long time. But there's flexibility within that, right? What does that look like for you? How does that support you? And so I just think that's a theme that I really pull from your story, is moving from that really rigid set of rules to kind of a flexible recovery journey, I really love that you describe your recovery journey starting in August of 2000 instead of only counting the days and minutes, right? Because you've learned a lot in that process, right? So both of those return to use that you had taught you a lot about yourself and your recovery and what you need. So that's kind of what I wanted to start a bit with. Jesse, I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to react to, if you want to respond to that, Danny.
I'll let Danny respond if he has anything, and then I'll go with some things I jotted down here.
And that's actually one of the things that's scary for me. There's no model of the recovering addict, and for me, that's one of the things that really resonate with me. And that I know that there are certain guideposts that I need to follow, but it's really my responsibility, and that's one of the things that's scary for me. There's not I want someone to give me a spreadsheet. I want someone to give me a rule book that I can follow, that it's going to make it okay. And making me responsible for my own recovery sometimes scares the crap out of me. But it's intimidating, but and it's one of those things that it's instilled in my personality, is that I want those rules. And Ani DeFranco has this song, I forget the title of the song, but there's a line and it says, "What doesn't bend breaks." And it's one of those things.
Buildings and Bridges. I know the song well. I'm a big Ani fan. But yes, go ahead.
She's amazing. So that is one of those things that I follow in my life. Is that when I get rigid, I know that there's something that I need to look at because there's some fear going on.
No, thank you, Danny, and I jotted that down too. I'll be listening to that song after this. Just to start off reflecting with, it never gets old to me. It's never lost on me that here we are. We just met shortly before we hit record on this podcast. And on the surface, it seems like, not much in common. I've never been to Oklahoma, just all these differences. But yet, as you started talking, I jotted down some pretty remarkable similarities that I could identify with you with, specifically around recovery. I, too, got my start in 12-step recovery at a biker meeting. And I felt very out of place, downright intimidated, because here's all these guys that, basically just told me this is what you do. And I, too, was looking for that, rigidity and rules and just, someone show me what I'm supposed to be doing, because my way of life is not conducive to anything positive for me, right? So I go to this meeting, and then just a testament to that meeting, who also comes in and shares regularly our inpatient sites at Spectrum. I probably have not been to that meeting in over a decade, yet I have multiple people in my phone that text me every day from that meeting. And it might just be a little mantra. It might just be a check-in. It might be more than that. And then, the text turns into like a check-in. Hey, how you doing? And then we talk. And so just the power of recovery. And then just kind of a funny one. You mentioned you were at Disney in California, hungover. Yep, that was my experience as well. First time at Disney in California, hungover because I tied one on the night before and couldn't wait to do it again. And yet here I am at the happiest place on earth, and I'm miserable, right? Because I think it's a chemical solution that I'm searching for. Little did I know it was a spiritual solution, as you so eloquently shared in your own experience. So where I would like to start, at least, with the progression. For you, I heard multiple times that, it wasn't too long after you had picked up something where it progressed to either, giving away a scholarship or, finding a place to live that was conducive to getting, blackout drunk every night at your grandmother's. Even with the knowledge of your family, and I heard you say mom telling you in one of her periods of recovery about genetics and the genetic link in addiction and families. Did that surprise you at all that this turned on you so quickly? What were your thoughts there when you went from, I finally fit in, this is what I've been looking for, to, well, this is a problem?
Let's say it never really surprised me. I thought that I could control it or find a way around it. And that's one of the things that, I'm too much of a believer in science to ignore the fact that there's a genetic link and that there's this link between my parents and me, and that I'm going to be an addict. But I thought I'm unique. I'm different. I can control it. And even like these 2 relapses that I had, I knew going into it that it was going to be a problem, but I thought that I would control it in such a way that I could at least minimize the impact that it would have in my life. And delusional, but still, if I put enough rigidity around it, it would be okay. And to some degree, it worked if you didn't look at the full picture, that I was lying to everyone, that I was miserable inside, and the whole time my every waking moment was controlled by the thought of using and how I was going to use again.
So one of the things I'd love to touch a bit on, since it is Pride Month, what is your sense now looking back, because your coming out story was in the middle of your, active addiction, right? And you shared, I think, something similar to, you were really still kind of using substances to feel okay, even when you were trying to become your true, authentic self. Can you talk a little bit about that connection to your coming out realization that you were gay, and what that looked like related to your substance use?
For me, they are linked, and they continue to be linked. And it's because being gay is part of who I am, just like being an addict is part of who I am. And I think that I find new threads to both of those every day. I think growing up in the church that I did, and I live with that shame, and I will continue to do recovery and therapy when I need it. And I continue to find these little threads of how that shame still infects my life, even though that to know that today being gay is one of those things that I like about myself now. It gives me a little bit, it's less unique now than what it was 20 years ago. But me and my husband joke all the time. We used to be novel. We used to be unique, and now there's gays everywhere. But it's one of those things that whenever I sit still and whenever I feel uncomfortable with myself, it is sometimes linked to there's always that little doubt that what if they were right in that church? What if what I'm doing is wrong? Because I'm operating on the belief that I have inside and the message that I feel that I get from my higher power, that I'm okay. But in this life, I'm never 100% sure of anything. And that's uncomfortable to me. I want that definite right or that definite wrong. And I don't have that. So my using, whenever I use, is part of the way that I mask that fear. And if it's not the primary reason, it is one of those reasons why I'm doing it. So for me, addiction and my sexuality are linked both in the good and in the bad.
Yeah. Well said.
And there's so much internalized shame and stigma, right? That is, from the society, from the world, from the rules that you have been exposed to, whether it be church or just the general society, that you have both those things that can, give you that internalized shame and stigma, which really comes externally, right? And it's when you kind of rely on your own internal compass that you can combat that in your recovery, right? And being your authentic self. But we all can't do that all the time. It's really hard. It's no different than, I look at a picture of myself and I'm like, ooh, that outfit was not a great choice. Like, instead of just being like, well, that's just how you look that day, Lisa. Like, everybody carries some of that, right? Which is very external, but gets internalized. And so I just think that's really important to talk about. What would you share with someone who is on a similar path in kind of going through a coming out journey, or is already out, but still kind of gets pulled back in at times with that internalized shame and stigma with addiction and their sexuality.
Don't give up. And it is sometimes it feels overwhelming because it's so big and there are so many messages out there that say that find a core group of people that love you and believe in you. And that is one of the things that saved me over and over. One of my dear friend Claudette, she during one of my I'd had a suicide attempt, and I was in the psychiatric unit of this hospital, and she came in and she was sitting by my bed, and I'd started volunteering with her, and she, probably around that close to the 2000 mark, she came in, she was sitting by the bed, and I couldn't believe this lady I was volunteering with came in and sat by with me in the bed, and one of the people at the hospital came and said, who is this to you? And she goes, he's my friend. And it was the first, it gives me chills even to think about it to this day that someone wanted to call me a friend. And I don't have a big circle, but I have a few people that I know that I can rely upon. Brene Brown talks about that's this thing that whenever you think about what people think of you, have a list of people written on a short piece of paper that you can rely. These are the people who should matter, not the people that are criticizing you for anything else. Who's on your little sheet of paper? Claudette's one of those people in my little piece of paper. And I've added to that piece of paper my sponsor that I had in Oklahoma. She was my sponsor for 13 years before I came up here, and she's one of the people that I add onto my piece of paper. But finding people who believe in me, who love me, but are also willing to call me out on my shit. So it's these are the same people that are going to go, Danny, you're not doing so well in this area. So it's people who love me, but are also loving me enough to say, might want to do something else.
Yeah. And Danny, I love the fact that you mentioned Brene Brown, because I was going to bring her up for a different reason that I'm sure we're all familiar with when you talk about shame and guilt, right? And she talks about guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am something wrong. And you did a beautiful job of counteracting that in response to Lisa's last reflection there, of getting around people who are Danny fans, right? Who know you and know your true authentic self and love you and want to spend time with you, just like you had mentioned with Claudette. I would be remiss during Pride Month, and because you gave us an opening to it when you were sharing, to not ask about the story of how you and your husband met each other.
And this is a good, so that's, we knew, so we got together when I had 3 years clean and he had a little bit over 1 year clean. And I had been assaulted once, and I didn't date for 10 years. My friends laughed at me because I was the gay man who hated other gay men. Nothing, stay away from me. And my sponsor was like, Danny, you've been in recovery long enough. You ought to go out and start seeing what it was like to date. So we had a friend who went to a gay AA meeting in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And she was this little bitty girl, and I was this big guy, and I'm trying to hide behind her going into this meeting. And I met him at this AA meeting. And funny enough, I was working at Blockbuster Video at the time, trying to make extra money on the weekends. And I had seen this guy come in and thought he was hot, big burly guy, beard, just someone that I thought would be that I wanted to flirt with. So I made an effort. It was like a project for me, school assignment. Sponsor says to date, get out there and try to go on a date. So I met him at this AA meeting, flirted with him. We went out on a date, and we knew that it was going to be something that was going to be long-term at the beginning. But one of the keys to success in this was that we both knew we were addicts, and we both knew that we were going to need help from the very beginning if we wanted to make anything lasting out of this. So we actually We didn't sexualize our relationship for the first month. We made it 28 days. So we didn't sexualize our relationship for that first month. So February still counts as a month, 28 days. It wasn't February, but we're still doing that 28 days. But we started going to therapy right away. We went to therapy for the first year of our relationship, and we made some decisions about what we wanted for our relationship. We were going to be monogamous. We were going to make recovery the foundation of our relationship, that we had our own individual recovery, and that foundation that we put into our relationship has stood the test of time. He's not relapsed. He's put up with me through both of the relapses that I had, and has not judged me. He's made sure he's one of the reasons why my relapses were short, because I knew that if I continued doing what I was doing, I was going to lose what we had built together. And but it's this kind of a little funny story. This meeting that we went to, I was working at the Oklahoma HIV and AIDS hotline, which was in the same church that this AA meeting was at. So he had came to visit me in my office, and it was at night. So after the meeting, he came to visit me, and we were in there kind of making out, and the pastor walks in to the office where we were making out. I've not seen Kenny jump and leap so fast ever in my whole entire life, and she was fine with it. She's like, she got a giggle out of it afterwards. But our relationship began that's how I met him, in an AA meeting. And we still do recovery stuff to this day. We take lots of road trips, and we like to listen to speaker meetings on the road trips and stuff like that.
Well, now you can listen to the Airing Addiction podcast on the road. You can listen to your episode and others. What I love about that is, one, I love a couple of things. One, I love the 28 days before you sexualize the relationship, right? Because that's such a recovery number, that 28 days and that whole recovery. So that I find really entertaining. But also the foundation, like, I'm biased, right? I'm a therapist. So I get that there's some bias here, that I think everybody should be in therapy. But starting a relationship from a place of therapy where you can negotiate your own individual boundaries and needs and have safe conversations like that. I mean, I think that is fantastic, and really has a lot to do with your success.
Thank you. We knew that we wanted to invest in, if we wanted it to last, we know that addicts come in with their own baggage already. So anything that we can do at the front end to help us, we wanted to do.
Yeah, and we all do, right?
Yeah. And I concur with Lisa, what you just said about, I'm biased. I tell people straight up, I think everyone should be in therapy. I'm seeing my therapist later today after work, right? It's just such a natural part of life. And I too can identify with my wife, who we're coming up on 10 years married later this summer. If she doesn't kick me out, I get a good chance of making that 10-year. And yeah, we started off in therapy as well. And, as you were saying that, I just couldn't help but think of the link between two people in recovery finding a relationship and starting off on that foundation. Because as you were sharing, I was thinking of two couples in particular that actually Spectrum gets the credit with putting together, believe it or not, being in treatment together, but not in the typical sense where you hear, we got together, it was happily ever after until it wasn't, and then this crisis happened. And I really think it was because of the work they put in separately to their own recovery first, and then got together after a period of time and really found, like you said earlier in your college experience, where you found true self-acceptance. Because let's face it, if I don't know who I really am, and I'm searching for that self-acceptance in, outside acceptance first, right? There's this saying that I like to live by in recovery, and it's, if you live for people's acceptance, you'll die from their rejection.
Oh, that's a good
people's
one.
acceptance, you'll die from their rejection, right? So until I'm confident and comfortable and love myself, I'm just on a, kind of like a losing battle of trying to look for it in everyone else. And I agree that, doing that with your not husband then, but your partner of choice then, to start that foundation and say, look, we have some things to discuss. We both are in recovery. We need to, put this right up front. That's a testament to the 20 years of marriage that you have.
Yeah. And and relationships are one of those things that I wish if there was something that I could tell a person early in recovery, is that please pay attention to those suggestions. Don't get to a relationship for that first year, and really focus on yourself and allow yourself to get to know yourself, because talk about a good replacement for a drug is a relationship and sex and stuff like that. And I see so many people get caught up in addiction through a relationship that it's disheartening sometimes. And I'm so glad that Kenny and I gave ourselves the room to get to know ourselves in that time first. And it's difficult. That's my sister in particular. August 2000, my sister and I got clean together, and she was my best friend through the first years of our recovery together. And that has been what has really been her link back to active addiction, is that relation, searching for love and acceptance through a person instead of finding it through yourself. It's scary sometimes.
Yeah, and I think there's that difference between looking for that acceptance from somebody versus looking for connection, right? Because we know recovery thrives in connection. The acceptance has to come from within. But then it allows you to make that connection with, whether it's your recovery community, your partner, your friends, your family. And sometimes I think people confuse that, right? So they think that connection means I'm seeking externally from others that acceptance through connection, instead of seeking acceptance for themselves and then being able to make connections.
And that's something that I still struggle with today. And that when I go through this, because I still work through the 12 steps and going through the character defects and how I act out on my shortcomings, is this, I still search for feeling okay by other people telling me I'm okay. So I'm a people pleaser and I work really hard. And as soon as you tell me I'm okay, I'm okay. And that's where I feel like I search for that acceptance instead of the connection where I'm okay of myself and I'm bringing myself to this job. And I think I'm going to be peeling apart that for the rest of my life as well, because I still sometimes struggle with not feeling okay. And I feel okay once you tell me I'm okay.
Well said. And to me, it brings to mind imposter syndrome, right? Where I certainly can identify with that as well in my personal recovery and professional settings. And I had a professor, I'll never forget, the one who introduced the term to me. She was one of these professors that had more letters after her name than in her name. And she had like one of those really long German last names with the 2 dots. So like, that's impressive. She was like an RN and a PhD and an element and all these, and she had her own practice. And, she was sharing with us authentically that some days she doesn't feel good enough and she feels like an imposter. And here I am on the receiving side of it. This is my professor in grad school and teaching me. I go to her to learn from her experience. And it was just such a paradigm shift, I guess, for me to be okay not feeling okay, in realizing that that's my human condition coming out. And some days on point, feel great. Other days it's like, ooh, like Lisa, you'd mentioned that kind of funny thing of like, I really wore that. Right? Or like, for me it's when my beard gets all kind of scraggly and big. My wife hated it when one winter I just let it grow, and now looking back, I hated it too. And I every time I get my hair cut, I'm like, can you do something about this? Right. So I guess that, again, going back to what you said, Danny, about true self-acceptance and being okay, not being okay.
Yeah. The gift of imperfection and another Brenéism. Yeah. It's hard finding that gift of imperfection and honoring who I am in a process and not trying to make my process look like someone else's. And that's one of the things that, not to make it a Brene podcast, but she was talking, I get a lot from what she shares. And she was talking about whenever she's writing a book, she's going through and reorganizing her desk and all this manic stuff. And she was talking to her husband about, I get so frustrated with myself because I do this whenever I'm starting to write a book. And he goes, it's just part of your process. And she's like, you're right. It's just part of my process. So, especially Kenny's my husband is one of those things that I'm a very passionate person, and I get very up in arms about things sometimes, and I want to tone myself down. And I tell Kenny, I wished I reacted a little bit differently. He's like, that's just who you are. And it's okay to love myself just as I am. I can tone down a little bit of that stuff. I don't have to write the email right away. I can let it sit there for a couple of minutes before I send it or something like that. But it's just part of who I am, and it's the unique part of myself that I can bring to. It's why I'm successful, and it's why the people that like me is because I am who I am, and I don't want to change that core part of myself.
Yeah. Listen, and we can keep talking about Brene Brown, right? Anytime we can have Brene Brown and Ani DeFranco discuss on the podcast is a good day for me. So
because I have a whole list of other Ani DeFranco songs that are being guided for me.
You might just want to schedule that out some point.
Yes.
Well, you talk about the connection with music, and I guess we can wrap it up here where, clearly music is very powerful as well. And certainly speaking from personal experience, I have my go-to songs. You mentioned gratitude at the beginning, and even saying you're grateful for return to use. And, I have my gratitude rock that I keep on my desk right here, and it means something. And there's multiple songs that even speak to gratitude. And have gratitude in the title that means something to me, and I have a positive emotional reaction to and connection with. So is that something that resonates in your own recovery with music? Is it certain songs? How does that all sort of play out in your own recovery, Danny?
For me in my recovery, there are definitely songs that I gravitate towards. So Tori Amos and Ani DeFranco are both of those, and I think that that it's because whenever I first got into recovery, those are the people who I'm most identified with. Little Earthquakes, Silent All These Years, Winter, the three songs from Tori Amos that will always still me and make me connect with myself. And I think that's what I really gravitate towards. There's not a message in a particular song that really attaches me to it. It's more about how does it ground me, and how does it what's going to still the world, quiet the world enough that I can stop and say, you're right here, Danny. So there are certain songs that I can listen to that definitely do that. Little Plastic Castles and that whole album has just been a grounding part for me.
That's a great recovery album, really, when you think about it. Like, it really is.
It is.
And Ani does have a song called Gratitude, so we're just going to keep talking about it here. This has been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate it. I think this is a great way to celebrate Pride Month and celebrate recovery and in all of its imperfection. So I just want to express my gratitude to you, Danny, for joining us today.
Lisa, thank you. Jesse, thank you. It has been a great experience. I look forward to listening to a few of these podcasts as we're on our road trips, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danny, for spending some time with us today and sharing your experience, strength, and hope. Thank you for everyone that's listening to this now in real time in June. And if you're anything like me, listening to podcasts, maybe finding it months or years down the road and, listening to all of them from start to beginning. If you'd like to listen to all of them, subscribe, like, all that fun stuff. We'll be back soon. We have a fun and impactful summer of guests lined up, and really looking forward to spending some time here. So thank you, Lisa. Thank you, James, behind the scenes, producing this for us. Thank you again, Danny, for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye.